Brennan responding in a New York Times op-ed accusing the president of using his power to play defense among the ongoing Russia investigation. Here's what he wrote. Quote, Mr. Trump clearly has become more desperate to protect himself and those close to him, which is why he made the politically motivated decision to revoke my security clearance in an attempt to scare into silence others who might dare to challenge him, end quote. The top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, also went after the president's decision.
This had an eerie memory of an enemies list. These people were being singled out to have either their clearances revoked or in the process of being revoked. To me, smacks of Nixonian-type practices of trying to silence anyone who's willing to criticize this president. That puts us again in uncharted territory.
But Republican Senator John Kennedy says Brennan had it coming.
Well, I made my feelings known about Mr. Brennan. I think most Americans look at our national intelligence experts as being above politics. Mr. Brennan has demonstrated that that's not the case. He's been totally political. I think I called him a butthead, and I meant it. I think he's given the national intelligence community a bad name.
Now, you know that's going to hashtag on Twitter. You know it's going to trend. Okay. And now the White House is reviewing the security clearances of 9 other former and current DOJ and FBI officials. Some have already lost their clearance, may not be able to have it reinstated. Sean Spicer, how different is this from anything that we've seen in the past with presidents in terms of security clearances?
Well, it's different in a lot of ways, but it's also different in that you don't have the heads of these organizations going out and becoming overtly political. I mean, you don't have, generally speaking, a CIA director that goes out and attacks the current commander-in-chief, uses words like treasonous and high crimes and misdemeanors. So I think it's on both sides, right? You have these individuals who are going out and using positions of trust and ones that have generally been non-political and engaging in a very political way. So in some ways, you're seeing a political response to a political action.
You know, Marie, you're the only one on the couch, I think, probably who might
probably
have
had a security clearance too.
Well, no, what I was going to say, probably who in this instance would have worked with some of the people who are having their, I wasn't done yet, with their security clearance.
I was giving him credit.
Thank you.
But so I'm curious as to your thoughts, because you know some of these people very well.
I know John Brennan, and I think that there are a few things to keep in mind here. First, there are rules for why you get security clearances revoked, and John Brennan did not break any of them. The ability for former officials to maintain their clearances isn't a gift to the former officials. It's so their successors can call on their predecessors to get guidance, to get support, to get information.
Can't that still happen, though?
Well,
can't they be reinstated, most of them at a high level? Not all.
I don't know if there's a way to overrule the president on this, but the point is...
but if there were a need, national security...
Well, the point is it's not a gift to these former officials. And I will also say that, you know, the idea that because former officials are speaking out publicly, that somehow they got on a list and now they're being punished by taking their clearance away. It's not going to change anything John Brennan does, but I do agree with him in that it smacks of sort of going against his ability to speak freely. He has done nothing to abuse his classified access because he probably doesn't even know that.
Can I ask you, what do you think then, what does it do to the intelligence community to have someone like John Brennan accuse President Trump of unfounded things like treason?
Well, I will say, I talked to a lot of my former colleagues at the CIA. A lot of them were very upset yesterday because they still really like John Brennan. Now, some of them don't. And I will say...
Should he be out there saying things like that?
Well, but look, I worked there under George W. Bush and under Barack Obama. And Mike Hayden, who I love and I worked for, was critical of the Obama administration's policies after he left office.
Well, I think there's a difference, but hold on.
But Sean, so the question is, what's the line, right?
But I think,
what goes too far?
Right.
And Donald Trump is taking this for partisan reasons.
But I think that there's a difference between being critical of the policies and talking about things that he would have had direct knowledge of and is still questioned whether he has not. If you have a clearance and you're talking about an investigation, an active investigation, it clouds the idea for the the viewer to know whether or not you're speaking based on experience or based on your access to information. So it's one thing to be critical of overall policy. So if Brennan was out there talking about our foreign policy, that would be one thing. And then I think we'd be having a completely different discussion.
So where's the line?
But the fact is, he's talking about an active investigation about intelligence that he's had access to. And he's not out there making it clear, which is saying, he's not out there saying, I have not looked at anything new, I have no new information. He is not allowing the viewer to discern whether or not what he knows is based on active intelligence that he has access to.
He's actually said that. He said, this isn't, I haven't gone in, and this isn't based on anything I know now.
We don't
and it feels petty, like the Wall Street
Well, they're not paying him or hiring him based on the fact that they like him. They're paying him and hiring him because they know that he had access.
And I'll give Comey at least. I mean, I'll give Director Comey some credit here, because my understanding is that Comey proactively went out and said, I don't want a clearance anymore because I don't want there to be.
Was that before or after the book?
Oh, it was after the book, I think, when they've asked him to review something. But the fact of the matter is, at some point, at least making it clear that I don't have access, therefore I can't be blamed, or no one can view what I think of as an opinion based on any kind of active intelligence.
Well, so this is not just President Trump making this argument that security clearances should be not revoked, but put it away after these officials leave their office. Senator Rand Paul has made the point that you just did about the fact that when John Brennan is going out on cable television and he still has access to classified information, we don't know who he's talking to. You run a serious risk of accidentally, unprovoked, exposing classified information in an unclassified setting. When it comes to what the requirements are for getting a security clearance, there are a number of them. There are also reasons why security clearances get revoked.
Yes,
but when you
I've
look at the situation and you look at the requirements, character, trustworthiness, honesty, reliability, discretion, and sound judgment are all requirements to obtain a security clearance. So based on how John Brennan has behaved over the course of the last year, over the course of the Trump presidency, the White House is looking at it and saying he is doing the country a disservice by going out with a security clearance and acting in this fashion. Now, they have argued that this is an attack on their free speech. No, it's not. They still have the ability to go and criticize the president, talk about their experiences. You are not entitled under the First Amendment to a security clearance.
Well, also, all right, I want to get in here with this because we have this live shot of the White House off to the left side of your screen, and that is because the president right now is holding a cabinet meeting inside the White House. Now, contemporaneously, we're getting some notes coming out of there, but there is a camera that is not going to show it live. So we will show it in its entirety when we gain access. But meanwhile, the president opening his remarks now in that cabinet meeting. I want to begin by expressing my condolences of a person I knew well, Aretha Franklin. She was given a great gift of her voice, my warmest, best wishes and sympathies. And then he went on to talk about the economy. He called on Larry Kudlow, economic advisor, and is touting that for right now. So as we get more notes out, and certainly if in that pool there is a reporter who would ask a question about the situation with John Brennan, we will bring you that information as quickly as possible. Lisa?
Well, all I was going to say is I find it a little bit rich for the guy John Brennan, while he was at the helm of the CIA, had to apologize to Senate Intel Committee members for spying on them and then lying to them about the fact that he spied on them. So I find it a little rich that he's out there now bemoaning abuse of power, when clearly he, at the helm of the CIA, abused his power.
Lisa, here's what bothers me.
Looking back at the fact, I don't think it's quite as vindictive as using the IRS to go after political opponents either.
But let's talk about security clearances. Mike Flynn maintained his clearance by all accounts when he left DIA. He went on the campaign trail. He stood on stage at political rallies and called for Hillary Clinton to be locked up. His clearance wasn't revoked. Donald Trump didn't call on him to have his clearance revoked. So it just looks like Donald Trump wants to revoke clearances of people who criticize him politically. And I don't like that. I think it's politicizing the security clearance process. And maybe people should stop focusing on John Brennan's clearance and actually on what he's saying, because he's raising some interesting things I think people should think about.
You also look at someone like Peter Strzok, he just got fired.
But how do you respond to Mike Flynn?
I mean, they asked, I actually agree with you. I think this idea that Mike Flynn, it's not that just Democrats who happen to be in the intelligence agencies then go out and benefit.
I'm not sure John Brennan's actually a Democrat.
Then whatever. He's certainly anti the current administration. The point is that there are Republicans who serve in administrations and Democrats, and they both go out and then benefit from their experience. But when it comes to the time now, we're in a different time than we were 2 years ago. Hillary Clinton was not the president of the United States trying to take care of the country's business and to keep the country safe. John Brennan and his commentary, again, there's a line there. If he still has access to classified information, as he has done in the past, he has exposed CIA operatives on the ground inadvertently. There is a case to be made that he shouldn't have that access anymore, whether he's using it or not, to prevent that national security risk from coming up.
And one of the questions is, are we just too generous with the words inadvertent, accidentally? In terms of this, should there be a stark or bright line on just cutting people off when administrations change? I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, I think, look, I as someone who's had one for 20 years, I think Marie's right. You want to be able to call people back into government, or the cost that the American taxpayer funds for people to get them. There's a reason you want them to maintain.
Can you easily reinstate?
It's not reinstate. It's active. So secret clearance is active for 10. A top secret is active for 5. And if they don't get renewed, then they go away. But the idea that you want to maintain them allows people who come in and out of government service, or maybe they're a contractor that gets pulled onto a classified project. You can't wait. Right now, the backlog is 12 months. And so
we want to be able to take this when it comes up. I apologize, but I'm being told by our producers, one of the things that might be asked about with the president inside this cabinet meeting, and again, we're just getting dribs and drabs right now, so as it happens, we'll take you there, might be about this John Brennan thing, which is exactly what Sean Spicer is talking about now. I would ask the question, could the president have gone through one of the other venues, an agency, FBI, just to have them review the process before doing this? That just might be a question that's asked too. The president now responding after hundreds of newspapers ran coordinated editorials today going after what they're calling the president's assault on the free press. Sean, of course, faced many of those reporters daily. What? We'll get your reaction, Sean. Okay. And the moment of truth for Paul Manafort could come today. We're on verdict watch in the trial of the former Trump campaign chairman. What the jury's decision will mean for the Mueller investigation, if anything at all. Stay close. And we are awaiting an opportunity to show you the president's remarks as they are being gathered right now by a pool of reporters. The president has mentioned, as he meets with his cabinet today, that the Parkland shooting the anniversary was yesterday. He's talking about school shootings and mentioned some reforms and the administration has taken in response. He's also talking about strengthening mental health laws and procedures, just giving you some notes that are coming out of there. And of course, we saw upwards of 300 editorial boards gathering with newspapers across the country today to write pro-journalism editorials. And the president just told reporters, quote, if you'd like, you can stay. If you'd like, you can leave. Freedom of the press. So a little bit of the color in the room there at the White House, but they are hitting these topics and might even be talking at some point, if asked, about the security clearance revocation of CIA Director John Brennan. Lisa?
All right. And another Fox News alert. A verdict could come at any moment. The jury now deliberating in the bank fraud trial of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Prosecutors tell the jurors the evidence is overwhelming, but the defense slamming Robert Mueller's team's star witness, Manafort's former right-hand man, Rick Gates, painting him as a liar. Peter Ducey is live at the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia with all the latest. Peter?
Lisa, the jury this morning asked the judge for a sort of change of venue. They thought the jury room was too small to deliberate, so they asked if they could do it in the break room instead. The judge said that they could, and that is where they are right now. This is the first day of deliberations, and the judge, T.S. Ellis, wanted to make sure that the 6 men and 6 women from Northern Virginia are focused more on the evidence than on the sometimes salty comments he made to the Mueller team about their approach, their witnesses, and their evidence. So the judge told the jury, since you're the sole and exclusive judges of the facts in this case, you should not construe any comments the court may have made on any question or any questions the court may have asked witnesses as expressing an opinion on the evidence. The Mueller team conceded in their closing argument that their star witness, Paul Manafort's former business partner Rick Gates, might have some credibility problems. Prosecutor Greg Andres told jurors they don't need to trust every word Gates said, but they should put it into context with the rest of the evidence. And Andres from the Miller team stressed that, quote, ladies and gentlemen, the star witness is, in this case, is the documents. The Manafort defense team, meanwhile, thinks they have wedged enough doubt into the Mueller team's case that jurors can't convict. Richard Wessling from the Manafort team says, quote, the Constitution guarantees each and every American that's charged with an offense the right to put the government to its burden, and it's your job to ensure that burden has been met. There was a funny moment in the court this morning that actually had Paul Manafort laughing. After the jury was impaneled and they left the courtroom, the judge, T.S. Ellis, asked from the bench if Mr. Trump was there, and people gasped and everybody was looking around the room. As it turns out, there's a prosecutor named Mr. Trump who was there for the next case. Back to you in New York.
All right, thank you for chances. Okay. Thank you for that color, Peter.
I wondering where that was going.
Peter,
I know, I was waiting.
You are hilarious.
Thank you, Peter. We appreciate it. And thanks for reporting on this. Thanks. All right. Well, Sean, as I know that was funny. As the jury deliberates, what does a conviction mean for the president?
Nothing. Look at the charges. They're bank fraud, their failure to pay your taxes, failure to register with the government properly. I think if he's found in violation, that's something that he's clearly done wrong, and the justice is being served. But it has nothing to do with the president at all. I mean, in fact, Judge Ellis has made it very clear that any allusion to the president is out of bounds because none of the charges have anything to do with him. And I think it kind of gets back to the underlying point here, which is that clearly he's going after all of these outside of the area charges against Manafort because he wants him to flip or to give information exchange for some kind of conviction or sentencing to get the bigger fish, in this case, what he believes is the president.
Are cooperating? And so we'll see what else Rick Gates gave them as well. He's cooperating probably just beyond Manafort. I think that Paul Manafort's team really took an interesting tact here to not bring any witnesses of their own. They did not get a plea agreement. Manafort seems to think he can beat this, but he is facing hundreds of years in jail time if he's convicted. And I will say to Sean, the president says he hires the best people. We've all known Manafort played a little fast and loose, and he brought him to run the campaign. And this isn't a surprising outcome for a lot of people who've known Paul Manafort, I think.
But look, I wrote all about this in my book, that Manafort at the time, we were heading into a convention in Cleveland where there was this never Trump effort afoot to put a new candidate on the ballot, to release the delegates, all this stuff. Manafort, going back to the Ford administration, had done the last brokered convention.
He's very effective.
He is. Yeah. But he was brought in for a specific reason on a very specific task, to be a delegate counter at the convention at what could be potentially an effort to undo the delegates, to change the rules. He had done Dole, Ford, Reagan. I mean, this is a guy who you can claim all of these other business issues about him or tax issues, but when it came to understanding the delegate math and brokered convention system, this was the right guy.
So, Sean, I've been asking this question. Why didn't the FBI give the campaign a heads up if they were looking at Paul Manafort? They gave Hillary Clinton a heads up when looking at things with what was going on behind the scenes with her, but they didn't do the same. Senator Lindsey Graham is saying, and he's writing a letter to Christopher Wray this week, the current FBI director. Why was there a difference?
I don't know.
Wouldn't it have helped?
I think that I'm not familiar with what standard FBI procedure is in a criminal investigation. Right. Or, at that point, maybe they didn't know.
I have a theory.
Well, yeah, I want to get Katie in here real quick
it's
before
pure
we've got to go.
speculation and just a theory, but before the convention, we weren't hearing a lot about Russian collusion or Russian influence. So if you look at the charges Paul Manafort is up against today with the jury, they have nothing to do with being influenced by Russians from a political perspective or from being used for espionage resources. He's up against charges that have him operating on a business level and not reporting taxes and being corrupt in that fashion. So maybe the FBI saw it as irrelevant to the campaign because it actually had nothing to do with the campaign. It had everything to do
and it still doesn't, which is why the judge wouldn't let it entered into the courtroom, let it be entered into the courtroom. It's an interesting kind of look at how things were going on back then, because you're talking about Paul Manafort's, resume coming in, and he would be a guy that you would want necessarily for a brokered convention.
He also had a history of representing dictators around the world, and yes, he did a good job counting delegates, but at some point campaigns have to make decisions about who works for them.
And he's also worked on numerous presidential
But again, with all due respect, there are a number of nefarious people
when the Ukraine stuff came out.
What about Podesta with the work that Podesta
is under investigation too.
And so the thing that's so fascinating, Katie talks about this, mentioned this, but back then there was this idea that we weren't colluding with ourselves. Suddenly we win, and it's like everyone wants to investigate every single person and manufacture this whole idea of collusion up. But at the time, it was Hillary Clinton that had taken money from the Russians, Bill Clinton who had done deals with Russian speeches.
Is under
the uranium deal. So, I mean, if we're going to bring up people, I think one of the things that's missing in all of the context of this Russian investigation is we still haven't figured out the other side of this. What was going on with the Clintons? What was going on with the DNC?
Sean. We'll see what Mueller comes up with.
For every single thing that's leaked out about this, not once have we heard about somebody from the Democratic side, except for, or I'm actually not sure of anybody, actually being investigated or questioned.
Tony Podesta is being investigated.
We've got to get going, although I feel like this conversation could keep going for a while, so we've got to go. All right, well, a newspaper in House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi's home state saying it's time for her to give up her quest to become Speaker of the House again. The paper calling it a distraction and damaging.
Well, new developments in a potential showdown between the president and Robert Mueller's special counsel. Rudy Giuliani reportedly saying the president's legal team is preparing to fight a potential subpoena from Mueller. The former mayor and federal prosecutor telling the Washington Post, quote, "We would move to squash the subpoena, and we're pretty much finished with our memorandum opposing a subpoena." Giuliani adding that Trump's attorneys are ready to argue it before the Supreme Court if it ever got there. And Giuliani reportedly expects veteran Washington lawyer Emmett Flood to play a big role in a legal fight. Flood joined the Trump legal team in May, and he also served as Bill Clinton's impeachment lawyer. Flood has reportedly cautioned the president that a subpoena fight could be decided by the nation's highest court, and that would be unprecedented. During the Clinton administration, independent counsel Kenneth Starr served President Bill Clinton with a subpoena, but it was withdrawn after Clinton agreed to testify. So, Sean Spicer, where are we with the subpoena fight? Is the president going to do an interview? Is he not going to do an interview? When is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen?
I'm not a lawyer, just to be clear. But I think this is the posturing that you do ahead of time, that you want to make it very clear what you will do, what you won't do, and you lay that groundwork out there. So that's clearly what Rudy Giuliani is doing on behalf of the president's legal case, is making sure that he's publicly communicating to Mueller, we're willing to do this if you're willing to give us this. But all of this normally happens behind the scenes. I think there's a reason that publicly they're doing it the way they are, which is to make sure that people understand that they are willing to do it, but there are terms to do that, and that it is being done in a way that protects the president, as any client would want. You would never allow a client to walk into something and just let it free for all. So I think part of this is to make sure that people who, even on both sides, understand why he's doing what he's doing or why he's not.
So Lisa, based on your background in public relations and communications, can you pick up on what Sean said about this idea that the Trump team, whether it's his personal lawyers or the White House counsel, has been out front, and they've actually been pretty successful about turning public opinion against the Mueller probe?
Well, yeah, and I think that was sort of the frustration. Well, yeah, we've seen it in polling of, the tides shifting a little bit there. And I do think that depending on what happens with the Manafort case, that could also impact that as well. If they're unsuccessful in bringing bringing charges against Manafort, people might sit back and say this is a big waste of time. I think there's an increasing frustration with the time and the length of this going on and the impact it's had on the president and the ability for him to do his job. But I think the president, the reason why there were changes in the legal team is I think he was getting so sick and tired of the PR battle and feeling like they weren't out there fighting it enough. And all this really could be is Giuliani and his team trying to get, a more favorable concessions with President Trump potentially sitting down. We don't really know what the true meaning is behind it. So
I will say that Marie brought up a moment ago how Manafort's taking a big, or his team is taking a big legal risk. And I agree with that. I mean, that by sort of resting your case without showing any witnesses, you're willing to put that's a pretty big gamble.
Another one
that being said, if he wins, if Manafort's successful, I think from a purely PR and political standpoint, that's a huge blow to Mueller. I don't think it has anything to do with the president either way, but I think from a public standpoint, you say you went after this guy guns a-blazing, you threw everything at the kitchen sink at him, everyone flipped on him, and you got nothing. If Manafort is successful by getting off of these charges, I think that is publicly a big blow to Mueller and his team, because I think people start
I don't think Mueller cares about the public relations, though. I think he's like head down, doing the legal work, and a subpoena fight legally, I don't know how that would turn out in the courts.
I don't know how you can ignore it, though.
Yeah.
We have to go.
We got to move on. Thanks, guys. A war of words now between New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and President Trump after the top Democrat stunned an audience yesterday when he unleashed on President Trump's Make America Great Again slogan. Reaction from the couch ahead.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great.
Today we celebrate the life and legacy of the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. She died earlier today, age 76, after a battle of pancreatic cancer. Reaction pouring in. We've shared with you some of what the president has said. President Trump inside the cabinet meeting in the White House now. And now President Michelle Obama issuing a statement, reading in part, quote, through her compositions and unmatched musicianship, Aretha helped define the American experience. In her voice, we could feel our history. All of it, and in every shade, our power and our pain, our darkness and our light, our quest for redemption, and our hard-won respect. She helped us feel more connected to each other, more hopeful, more human. And sometimes she helped us forget about everything else and dance. And of course, President Trump tweeted this earlier ahead of his comments at the cabinet meeting. The Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, is dead. She was a great woman with a wonderful gift from God. Her voice, she will be missed. He also spoke about her, and I read those words to you because they were coming out of the cabinet meeting. It's where he started. He praised Aretha Franklin and offered his condolences to her loved ones, and of course he said he knew her well. We will bring you more reaction today to the passing of Aretha Franklin. President Trump jumping into a heated back and forth with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo after the potential 2020 Democrat presidential candidate appeared to stun an audience yesterday with a comment rebuking President Trump's Make America Great Again slogan. Watch this.
The simple point is all this comes down to this. We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great. We have not reached greatness. We will reach greatness when every American is fully engaged.
Wow. President Trump responded on Twitter. Can you believe this is the governor of the highest tax state in the U.S., Andrew Cuomo, having a total meltdown, exclamation point. But Cuomo appeared to double down, tweeting back to the president, what you say would be great again would not be great at all. We will not go back to discrimination, segregation, sexism, isolationism, racism, or the KKK. The governor is in a re-election fight against actress Cynthia Nixon, who is also an open socialist. Nixon told New York One, Cuomo is, quote, trying to figure out what a progressive sounds like and missing by a mile. Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, Sean Spicer.
First is that I agree with Cynthia Nixon. But that is
that's breaking news.
I know. That is the deplorable comment of this cycle. I mean, the idea that he says America is not great is undermines so much of the American spirit, the American military, so many people who serve this country, and so many great things that have come forward. Of course, we all know that America can always be better and greater, but we are a great country. We're the envy of the world. We've got great and amazing people. And so I'm sure that quote is going to hang around for quite some time.
So I immediately took this at those points of greatness when I know our military has really led us. And I very seldom weigh in this way, but I tweeted out, I mean, with my book, it's based on growing up military brat. And Sean, you and I were talking about just having that conversation in social media right now. Sometimes you'll get a lot of feedback, and I did on this. Tell that to every single active duty American service member, every military veteran of every war we have fought, every loving family member of every soldier, Marine, guard, sailor, airman, woman who has died serving this nation. Then tell them how sorry you are. Hashtag Andrew Cuomo. I just weighed in on that point because I felt so strongly about it, and I see you nodding.
I don't think that Andrew Cuomo doesn't believe this country's great. I think that he was trying to turn the president's slogan around on him and flubbed it. So and I think that he should. So
in 2010, when Andrew Cuomo used the slogan "Make New York Great Again,"
right.
What was that about?
Well, I have no idea. I'm not a close follower of his whole career. What I'm saying, though, is I do not think that Andrew Cuomo doesn't believe it's a great country. I think he tried to use a political tactic and turn the slogan around, and it didn't come out right. And I don't, and you know, I and my fellow Democrats believe this is an exceptional country. We believe in American exceptionalism. We disagree with the president's policies. And in terms of the country, you know, a lot of politicians talk about problems. Donald Trump's inauguration address was all about American carnage. So I think that we can take a step back and say we're working towards a more perfect union.
I know you want to.
And I don't know. And Katie, I don't know. What do you think President Trump's referring to when he says "Make America Great Again"?
The economy and how terrible the economy was under Barack Obama for nearly a decade of my life. But I want to respond to. Look, I could give Andrew Cuomo the benefit of the doubt if Democrats didn't have a track record over recent years of being unpatriotic, putting up with NFL players kneeling for the national anthem.
That is not unpatriotic.
Hillary Clinton saying yesterday, praising a little boy. Hillary Clinton, I stand by it completely. Hillary Clinton praising a child for not standing for the national anthem. You have the DNC embracing groups like Occupy Wall Street that are burning the American flag in the streets. And then you have Barack Obama himself saying, yeah, America's exceptional just like the Greeks thinks that they are exceptional. Andrew Cuomo yesterday didn't flub anything. This is the pattern of Democrats over the past 10 years. Wow. And they're not out there saying how great America actually is. They're not talking about all the aid Americans are giving all over the world.
But you're not Andrew Cuomo, and you're not aspiring to be the commander-in-chief, which is why I went to the military.
Hold on, Maria, I've got a question for you.
Barack Obama said it all the time.
To what Katie just said, then what do you make of the Gallup poll recently that found that only 3 in 10 Democrats are extremely proud of America, whereas you have 7 in 10 Republicans that are extremely proud of America? What would you make of that polling?
I think that's a reflection of how divided our country.
Even under President Obama, the numbers still weren't as high as Republicans.
Do you want me to answer your question or not?
I am making sure that you're fully aware of the context of my question.
I am listening to your question, Lisa. Believe me, okay? I think that is a indication of how divided our country is. And it's Democrats saying they don't like the direction policies in this country are taking under this president.
And I just mentioned, though, the numbers still were not as high as Republicans.
I'm telling you what I think, Lisa. And I think that the accusation that Democrats are unpatriotic and putting Barack Obama in that list, Katie, you and I are friends. I am so offended by what you just said. We can say this country has more work to do.
Do you think that standing for the national anthem is a patriotic act or not?
I think that
yes or no?
I think that
yes or no?
Katie,
is it a patriotic act or not?
I think that the highest form of patriotism is protest. It's how our country was founded.
Or serving in the military, which Andrew Cuomo clearly doesn't think is a great thing to do for the Americans.
Or serving in the CIA like I did, and I would love for you to come to DC and serve in the government too.
Before we have to scoot, Sean, I do want you to weigh in if you can
a lot for the country
about the military component of this, because you know we sometimes look at what presidents do and their policies and whatnot, and it matters the words that they use, particularly the same week that the NDAA was signed. I mean, we're looking at a situation, and not that he was targeting Andrew Cuomo, the military, but he is lapsing in that memory, perhaps, or judgment about our greatest moments.
But what I actually, the thing that I find find fascinating is this. Cuomo may have flubbed this, maybe he meant it, maybe he, whatever. But the thing that I find fascinating about the coverage of it is if President Trump had made a similar statement, it would be the talk of every news channel. They'd be asked to apologize for it. Cuomo gets out there, and what I've seen so far on other stations that I've read the transcript for is everyone goes out there and says what Marie said, which may be valid, which is that, oh, this isn't what he meant. They immediately rush to the defense of everyone on the left who makes a statement that is called a question. If President Trump or any Republican had made a similar statement like that, there would be calls for him to resign. He needs to apologize. He needs to be public out in front of it. The way that all of these things are perceived, the left, when they say something, it's, this wasn't what he meant, let's move on. When someone on the right or Republican or conservative makes a similar type statement, it becomes national news and everybody must weigh on it and state their opinion.
Okay, we'll move on. Joining calls from the Boston Globe and the New York Times, hundreds of newspapers publishing editorials calling up the entire hour that we have been on the air, something that we've been waiting to show you now. So obviously we can't show it to you in its entirety, but we don't want to miss the opportunity to bring you the president with his cabinet, touting, first of all, praising Aretha Franklin, who passed away today. I was kind of giving you notes as they were coming out of the cabinet meeting today with the president. So he did mention the media. He said you were free to stay, free to go, freedom of the press, kind of taking a swipe on a day when so many editorials have been written by newspapers across the country pro-coverage and pro-journalism. Several cabinet members spoke as well. The president kind of almost interviewing them at parts so that he could get on the record about the economy and some strong things that are happening with that right now. CIA Director John Brennan and the revocation of his security clearance did not come up as a topic. Secretary of State Pompeo read a prayer, and so I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of the flavor now that we're finally, from moments ago, as you see on the screen, starting to get the video of that cabinet meeting. Lisa?
All right, well, hundreds of newspapers across the country running editorials today denouncing what they say is President Trump's ongoing attack on the media. The Boston Globe writing, quote, the model of inciting his supporters in this regard is how 21st century authoritarians like Vladimir Putin and the leader of Turkey operate. You don't need formal censorship to strangle a supply of information. Trump's apologists feebly insists that he is referring only to biased coverage rather than the entire Fourth Estate. But the president's own words and long track record show again and again just how deeply cynical and dishonest this argument is. And President Trump hitting back, tweeting earlier today, quote, the Boston Globe, which was sold to the failing New York Times for $1.3 billion, parentheses, plus $800 million in losses and investment, or $2.1 billion, was then sold by the New York Times, or the Times, for $1. Now the Globe is in collusion with other papers on free press. Prove it. So Sean, where did we go? All right, well,
going to you.
Well, okay, look, so President Trump has made the argument that the media is kind of collectively against him. Okay. And then you have 350 editorials essentially collectively against him. So, I mean, doesn't this sort of help prove his point?
Yeah, in some ways it does. Obviously, there's a division between the editorial and the opinion side and the news side. But look, the reality is the Media Research Center did a study that shows 92% of the coverage against the president is negative. Harvard Schwarzstein Center did a similar one, and the Pew Research Center did another one. At some point, I would encourage folks in the press, instead of continuing to double down, and they have every right to do it, that's what makes our country great, but also look and say, how can you have an economy that's doing as well as it has? How can you have so many people's personal job safety get increased and their well-being? So many of the things that he's doing, and yet all of the coverage continue to be negative. At some point, the press continues to make it about them, and that I don't think helps them in the long run either. The more it's focused on them, the more people, and you look at the trust that people have in the institution is continuing to go down. And so look, the thing that I find fascinating is the correlation. The harder they come at him, the higher his approval rating goes. And I think that because the American people are not, they get it. Yeah. They see what's happening, they see the results of his administration and his policies, and they go, you know what, we don't believe it. And that doesn't help journalism.
The flip side of this as well, and you know what the editorials are arguing is that, you know, President Trump calling the media the enemy of the people. I know he's clarified before that it's fake news, but there's a Quinnipiac poll showing that 51% of Republicans agree with that statement. So, Katie, what has the impact on journalism been?
Well, look, I think Sean would probably agree with this point. Look, President Trump has said some pretty mean things about the press, some deserved, maybe some not deserved. It's not the role of the press to be positive only towards government. We just wish it would be more evenly applied. Barack Obama actually went after the press by spying on them. We're not just talking about Fox News, we're talking about AP reporters, executives, and I didn't see 300 plus editorials condemning
that's because they agreed with
them for that,
not
right?
The attack,
and calling for how dangerous it is that the White House was going after free speech. I mean, I think that is more of an issue than the president saying.
Clearly, this cabinet meeting shows
Should we show the daily briefing every day from the White House?
Sure, you can do what you want. The media outlets. This is a free country. Do what you want.
All right,
that's the beauty of it.
We've got to end there. More Outnumbered in just a moment.